Juana Barraza, one of Mexico's most infamous serial killers, began a crime spree that lasted from the late 1990s to the early 2000s. Born to an alcoholic mother, Justa Samprio, she would not experience an easy childhood. Her mother traded her to a man for 3 beers. This man would repeatedly rape Juana, even impregnating her with a son. This would go on to serve as the foundation for her depraved mind. She would eventually become known as La Matavietas, or the Old Lady Killer. Juana's sinister journey began by carefully selecting her victims from a vulnerable demographic, elderly women living alone. Exploiting their loneliness and fragility, she would gain their trust under the guise of being a government worker in social welfare. This calculated approach allowed her to enter their homes undetected. Once inside, Juana's true nature as a relentless predator emerged. She bludgeoned and strangled her victims with whatever she could find. After murdering these women, she would then go on to rob them. The gruesome scenes she left behind were drenched in horror, bearing witness to the ferocity of her crimes. Barraza's victims, all aged 60 or over, were no match for her physical prowess that she honed being a professional lucha libre wrestler named La Dama del Silencio, or the Silent Lady. Law enforcement agencies tirelessly pursued leads, hoping to bring an end to the reign of terror. Investigators were no closer to finding the killer because they believed only a man could commit such heinous crimes. Even as witnesses reported seeing a woman in a wig, police still believed this was the work of a man, going as far as arresting transvestite prostitutes in Mexico City. It wasn't until January 25th, 2006 that a crucial breakthrough occurred. Juana was seen fleeing the home of her latest victim, 82-year-old Ana Maria de los Reyes Alfaro, whom she had just strangled with a stethoscope. The witness chased down Juana after discovering the body, and an arrest was made. Barraza was tried in the spring of 2008, where the disturbing details of her crimes would be put on full display. Prosecutors alleged she was responsible for as many as 40 deaths, even though she would only confess to the crime she was caught fleeing from. She told police her motive was the resentment she still felt for the treatment experienced from her mother. On March 31st, 2008, her reign of terror would officially end when she was found guilty of 16 murders. The court handed down a sentence of 759 years in prison, ensuring she would never again walk free.
In the heart of Mexico City, Juana Barraza was known as a humble and hard-working woman who cared for her elderly mother. But behind closed doors, Juana harbored a dark secret that would eventually lead to her downfall. Growing up, Juana had a troubled childhood, marked by abuse and neglect. As she entered adulthood, she became a professional wrestler and adopted the name La Dama del Silencio, the Lady of Silence. Her athleticism and strength made her a fierce competitor in the ring, but outside of it, she struggled to make ends meet. In the early 2000s, a string of murders began to plague Mexico City. The victims were mostly elderly women who lived alone, and they were all strangled to death. The police were stumped, and the city was gripped with fear. Juana Barraza, the unlikely suspect, was eventually caught when she was caught fleeing the scene of a murder. The evidence against her was overwhelming, and she was sentenced to 759 years in prison. In prison, Juana tried to make amends for her crimes. She became a model prisoner and even helped to organize a wrestling tournament for the other inmates. But the legacy of her crimes would haunt her for the rest of her life. Juana Barraza's story is a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked trauma and the toll it can take on a person's psyche. It's also a reminder that we should never judge a book by its cover, as the most unlikely people can be capable of the most heinous crimes.
Juana Barraza known as La Mata Viejitas, the Little Old Lady Killer, was a serial killer who terrorized Mexico City from 1998 to 2006. A former professional wrestler, Barraza used her strength and cunning to target elderly women living alone. A crime spree rooted in her traumatic childhood. Born in 1957, Barraza endured severe abuse, including being sold by her alcoholic mother to a man who assaulted her. This fostered a deep hatred for older women, which drove her to murder. Disguised as a nurse or social worker, she gained access to her victims' homes, where she would strangle them using scarves, cords, or her bare hands. Afterward, she stole small valuables to support herself. The murders baffled police, who initially believed the killer was male due to the violence involved. Over 8 years, Barraza claimed the lives of over 40 women, leaving behind little evidence until she was caught, fleeing the scene of her final murder in 2006. Fingerprints tied her to numerous other crime scenes. Convicted of 16 murders, Barraza was sentenced to 759 years in prison. Her case remains one of Mexico's most infamous, a chilling tale of how a tortured past shaped one of the country's deadliest killers.
Disclaimer: this content may be disturbing for some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. Welcome back to my world, where the darkness is always lurking. Today, I will be taking you through the chilling story of Juana Barraza, also known as the Old Lady Killer. Juana Barraza was born in 1957 in Hidalgo, Mexico. She was the daughter of a prostitute and grew up in poverty. She was physically and emotionally abused by her mother and began working as a prostitute at a young age. Her life took a dark turn when she discovered professional wrestling and became a wrestler herself. She took on the persona of the Silent Lady and became a well-known figure in the wrestling world. However, Juana's wrestling career came to an end, and she turned to a life of crime. She began robbing elderly women in their homes, and soon her robberies turned into brutal murders. Juana's first known victim was an 82-year-old woman named Ana Maria de los Reyes. She was found dead in her apartment in 1998, and the cause of death was determined to be asphyxiation. The police initially had no leads in the case, and the murder remained unsolved. Juana continued her killing spree, targeting elderly women who lived alone. She would gain their trust by posing as a social worker or nurse, and once inside their homes, she would strangle them with a stethoscope or a cord. The police had a hard time linking the murders together, as the victims had no apparent connection to each other. However, they did notice a pattern of the victims being elderly women who lived alone. Juana's killing spree came to an end in 2006 when she was caught red-handed by a neighbor who saw her leaving the home of an elderly woman who had just been killed. During her trial, Juana confessed to killing 42 elderly women over a period of several years. She claimed that she was motivated by a deep-seated anger towards her own mother and that she felt a sense of power and control over her victims. The trial was highly publicized in Mexico and gained international attention. Juana was found guilty of multiple counts of murder and was sentenced to 759 years in prison. She is currently serving her sentence in Santa Marta Acatitla, a maximum security prison in Mexico City. Juana's case shocked and horrified the nation of Mexico, as well as the rest of the world. She became a symbol of the violence and brutality that often goes unnoticed in the lives of the most vulnerable members of society. Juana Barraza's story is a chilling reminder that the darkness can lurk in unexpected places, and that even those who are supposed to be helping and caring for us can turn out to be our worst nightmares. Until next time, stay safe, and beware of the darkness that lurks in the shadows.
I was sentenced to 759 years in prison and am one of the most brutal cases in Mexico. I am Juana Barraza Sampirio, better known as the Old Lady Killer. I was born on December 27, 1957, in the municipality of Pasayucan, Mexico. My father abandoned my mother on the day I was born. My mother, an alcoholic, physically and verbally abused me every day. We lived in great poverty and difficult economic circumstances. One day, in exchange for a pack of beers, my mother allowed an older man to take me with him for intimate relations. I became pregnant, and subsequently, I gave birth to 6 more children. My eldest son, Jose Enrique, was murdered at the age of 24 during a street brawl, marking the saddest moment of my life. My mother died of cirrhosis when I was 18, a death that affected me despite my feelings of hatred toward her. It all began in the mid-1990s when I committed atrocious acts, taking the lives of innocent people. My victims were elderly individuals whom I offered help as a nurse, getting close to them without raising suspicions. As reports of murdered seniors living alone surfaced, the police assumed a large, strong man was the culprit. But it was me committing these heinous acts. To gain their trust, I conversed with these elderly women, accompanied them home, and offered various elderly assistance programs and household help. Once inside their homes, I ended their lives. I enjoyed watching their souls escape their eyes, helpless like my mother, reminiscent of the abuse I endured as a child. I was arrested in 2006 when a young man witnessed me entering one of my victims' homes. To everyone's surprise, the sought-after killer wasn't a man but me, a woman. I was linked to a minimum of 10 murders, but during the trial, the number rose to 17. As a result, I received a 759-year sentence, later reduced to 50 as the maximum penalty. Rumors suggest there were 46 victims. I am currently incarcerated at Santa Maria Prison, where I even married a man before divorcing him. I will be eligible for release at the age of 98. In a recent interview, I claimed innocence, stating that my conviction is a mistake. Let me know in the comments whether you believe I am innocent or not.